Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
So as we were talking before I started recording this session on how difficult this material is, and I was about to say, and I wanted to record this, that I think this, at least to try and parse out the beauty and the truth within these difficult passages. Number one is that the Torah doesn't shy away from discussing every aspect of life that it can try to, and of course, that's a big category, but it pretty much goes through every aspect of life. And what I think it's trying to deal with now is the psychology of it. I mean, that's an anachronistic term to use here, but nevertheless, it's talking about feelings, and it's talking about the spirit of jealousy. And there's a point made which you might enjoy hearing, where the rabbis say that the relationship between a husband and a wife, okay, and in the context, of course, it's going to say a husband and a wife, is so precious that in order to try to restore that relationship, if it's gone awry, God is willing to have his name blotted out. Because as you'll see, I'm anticipating ahead, but I want you to know this, that one of the things that the priest does is he writes out the terms of this curse, and God's name is on that piece of paper. And he takes that piece of paper and he puts it into the water, and the ink goes into the water, so that God's name is essentially being blotted out. And that the loving relationship and the trust, right? Because you really can't have love without trust, which is such a sad, when you think about that, and you think about what is going on in this country politically right now, how terrible it is that we're having such a hard time being able to trust conflicting opinions. And that's just taking this further, but that God is willing to have God's name blotted out. That is powerful. That's how important it is to be able to maintain loving relationships. That's important. So let's get into I'm going to go ahead and share the screen now. So we're still at the very beginnings of this, of course. So, va'avar alav ruach kin'ah, a spirit of jealousy passes over him. This is, of course, the husband. And interestingly enough, this is important because it's not so obvious from the text as we move into this. But Rashi tells us when this is happening. In other words, how the Torah is setting up the conditions for this. And he says, here's va'avar alav, kodem lastira. This is before she actually goes into a private place with this other man. So in other words, he has this feeling of jealousy towards his wife. And this happens before anything actually takes place. So maybe there's some sense, it doesn't tell us explicitly that he's seen her spending a lot of time with him, with this other man. It doesn't say that, it just says, but nothing, whatever the reason this is, that he's had, at least as we are looking at the text as it states now. So, V'kine et ishto, and it says, and he, kin'ah would be jealousy, right? I need someone to mute, please. And he has, it sounds like he has felt jealousy to his wife, but we're going to see that is not how we're going to understand this passage. Vehi nitma'ah, and she has become defiled, meaning subsequently she did have relations with this other man, or avar alav ruach kina, or the spirit of jealousy has passed over him, the kinei et ishto, and he, whatever this kinei means here, and as I said, we'll clarify it in a moment, his wife, but it has to do with something coming out of the jealousy he had. The he lo nitma'a, but she in fact hasn't ever engaged actually in relations with this other man. So it's very important that we are going to see what Rashi tells us. Ruach kina, a spirit of jealousy, right? Vekine, and he kineid. Pirshu rabotenu. So our sages explain in the tractate Sotah, and this looks like 3a, Lashon Hatra'a, that this kine means, denotes, sorry, one second, please. Okay, that it connotes forewarning, that he has said something to her, that she has said to her, Shehitraba, that he has warned her, Al tistari im ish ploni, do not seclude yourself with so-and-so. So in other words, this isn't sort of a mysterious kind of thing where she is acting out of total innocence, etc., etc., etc. He has said to her, listen, when you go and you're with that other man, that I really, it makes me feel really, really jealous about this, etc. I'll let you connect the dots on that. But that's really important because the way we would read it in the Torah with not fully understanding what these words mean, I don't think we would have inferred that. Vehi nitma'al or aval, etc. So it says, and she nevertheless went ahead and had relations with this other man, or she didn't, right? Klomar, that is to say, hu hitraba, that is to say, he warned her, he forewarned her, va'avra al hatra'ato. In that case, she transgressed his warning. Ve'ein yodea, and we don't know, there's no one who really knows for sure, im nitma'a olav, whether she in fact became defiled. Of course, that's the way the Torah is expressing her having carnal relations with this other man or not. So there's no way to know for sure whether something actually has happened, whether an adulterous act has happened. So we're narrowing this down to saying these are the conditions. So if he never gave her, if he never said to her, listen, I don't want you to spend personal private time or consort with that other man. Okay, if he never did that, then this all doesn't, it all falls away. We don't go through this process. So moving on. Vehevi ha'ish et ishto el hakohen. The man should bring his wife to the priest. Vehevi et korbana aleha. And he should bring her sacrifice, right, her offerings for her. Asiri now tells us what the offering is going to be. Asirit, 1/10 of an ephah, kemach seorim, of barley flour. Lo yitzok alav shemen. So we know already, we've learned a little bit about mincha offerings, right? Meal offerings. And we know that generally speaking, they were mixed with oil and frankincense. Okay. And we're being told that we don't have that. That on this particular meal offering, there is no lo yitzok alav shemen, that there is no oil that's poured on this or mixed with it. The lo yiten alav levona, and you shall not place frankincense upon it. And the Torah goes on to say, ki minchat kinaot hu, because it is a meal offering of jealousy. Minchat zichron, it's got to be zikaron, maskeret avon, a meal offering of remembrance. The association of this meal offering is maskeret avon, it is bringing to mind iniquity, transgression. So Rashi now goes into explaining the symbolism that is involved in this offering. So the Torah says kemach, and he says normally when it talks about a meal offering, it says solet. Solet is fine flour. Kemach is just flour. Shelo yehe misolet. In other words, this meal offering needs to not be made of the best. It's made out of plain flour. And not only is it made out of plain flour, but it's made out of seorim. It's made out of barley. Velo chitim, and not wheat. It's not wheat flour. And again, he's citing the tractate Sotah on page 12. And what's the significance? He asta ma'aseh behema. She performed an act of an animal. So here's, the implication of this is that to become human, we have to, I've said this so many times, right? We have to be able to conquer our impulses. We have to be able to do it. And this, following this particular impulse is considered just acting in a way of an animal. The korbanah, and so her offering, me'ochel behema, or ma'achal behema, is cattle food. She brings cattle fodder for the mincha to symbolize the fact that she has not controlled her animal impulses, her animal desires. And now it goes on, lo yitzok alav shemen, you shall not pour oil on it. Shelo yehe korbanah mehudar. So the point about this is that her offering should not be beautified. It shouldn't be in some way made to be nice. So you've heard the term hidur mitzvah. That's a term that refers to beautifying a mitzvah. So, for example, if you have a lulav, a palm branch, you want to pick out the most beautiful one you can find, one etrog, a citron, right, for Sukkot, and you want to try, this is called hidur mitzvah, or in the case of, if you, for example, have a prayer shawl, then the bag in which you put the prayer shawl, you try to get something that's beautifully embroidered. So this all has to do with the concept of hidur mitzvah. But the point is, this mincha has no oil. So there's nothing to make this particular meal offering beautified. Shehashemen, he explains, Shehashemen karui or, because oil is referred to as light. Vehi asta b'choshech, but she performed this act in darkness. And I made a note, I checked out, this is Safari, I was very helpful here. And they pointed out that oil is sometimes referred to as yitzhar. Certainly it's in the Torah where it talks about your corn, your wine, and your oil, I believe in the second paragraph of the Shema, and yitzhar is understood as oil, your corn, your wine, and your oil. So from the word sohar, this is related to the word, I got put in Department of Redundancy going on here, sorry. Oh, heavens. Sorry, I'll see it. There we go. Let's see if I can do this. I'll do this another time. There we go. Meaning light. So that's the symbolism there. Velo yiten alav levona, you shall not place frankincense on it. Sha imahot, because the matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, nikraot levona. There's sometimes they use the metaphor of frankincense to refer to the matriarchs. Shne'emar, as it states in Shir HaShirim, in the book Song of Songs, El Givat HaLevona, to the mountain or to the heights of frankincense. And that's understood as a reference to the matriarchs. Vehi Pirsha Midachehem, and she turned away from their ways, the ways of the matriarchs, who were modest and loyal, faithful, etc. So no frankincense. Ki minchat kenaot hu. Rashi is going to tell us that we would expect the word kenaot as feminine to take this pronoun he, or rather the article he, which is the female version of the feminine version of the definite article. So who can refer to, of course, is masculine, and so he's explaining the grammar of the Torah here. Hakemach hazeh, okay. So it's referring, because this meal offering is referring to the flour. Hakemach hazeh, this flour. Kemach lashon zachar. The word flour in Hebrew is masculine. So, of course, Hebrew is a language where nouns are masculine or feminine, or sometimes there may be both. Not very often, but there are a few cases where the noun can sometimes be masculine or feminine. Minchat kenaot, right? A mincha of jealousy, me'oreret aleha. It arouses regarding it. Shtei kenaot, in other words, associated with the two levels of jealousy. Kinat hamakom, the jealousy of the makom is a reference to God, literally means the place. In other words, the understanding that part of our level of understanding of our own transcendent creator is that this concept that we have of the divine encompasses everything else. So it's the ultimate place. In other words, part of understanding is that the act of creation that we read about in Genesis is ongoing. The fact that I'm speaking words to you right now, or any element of all the processes that go on throughout entire reality, is actually because it is divinely caused. That there's a divine element to every dynamic, every moment, every reality. So of this universe, of the universe, and that the divine is the one that makes it all possible. There's this one cause for all of it. So one, jealousy, right? Because this kind of behavior creates problems in this great place that we're in, right? The kinat habal, and the jealousy of the husband. So, despite the fact that I think we can focus on how the woman is being treated, we also at least have to take into account the fact that she's done something, there's a possibility that she's done something wrong. And because in our culture, we may not consider adultery to be such a terrible thing, certainly we don't, generally speak, have any legal recourse regarding it. It doesn't mean it's okay. Because of anyone who has actually experienced a family where adultery has taken place, it is incredible the damage it causes. So, V'lakach hakohen mayim kedoshim b'chli cheres, and the priest should take sanctified water, and we're going to have to explain that, b'chli cheres, in an earthenware vessel, umin, here we go, ha'afar, and from the dust, asher yeh b'karka hamishkan, which is in the floor of the mishkan, of the tabernacle, or the karka means earth, something like that, right? Yikach hakohen, the priest shall take v'natan el hamayim, and he should take that dust and put it into the water. So again, I think even though There may be other symbolism that I can think of regarding the water and the dust. Remember, that's how God created human beings. He took the dust of the earth and he put water in it and formed human beings. So I think this is talking here about how significant this was about what happened, and to understand that our desire to have sexual relations is primarily built into us, comes from a divine source in order to procreate, and that we know that procreation is a miracle. In Judaism, there's more to it than that. It's not just about procreation, but to the degree that it is an expression of intimacy between two people, it has to be done in a sanctified way. So, Mayim Kedoshim, holy water, right? Sanctified water. Shekidsho Bechior. In other words, this is water that comes from the laver that we learned about back in Exodus, where the priests used to wash their hands and their feet from the water from that laver. So that's where this water comes from. The fee she ma'aseh hakior, and the reason is, look at this. This is a very cool reference. He says the way in which the materials from which the laver was created, right? It was this bronze laver, and you may remember this from when we talked about it back in Exodus. Okay, this came from the brass, right? The brass of the mirrors of the women who served at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And we learned that story about, and that had to do with the fact that when the people in the Israelites in Egypt were told basically that the boy babies were going to be thrown into the Nile. Remember, Pharaoh attempted to kill all the male children, that the men no longer wanted to engage in sexual activity, in procreation. And the women would go out into the fields and they would play around with their mirrors to tease their husbands. Because the women said, well, okay, it's true, the boy babies may be killed, it's a possibility, but what about the girl babies? So this was considered an act of devotion, the desire to procreate, and so that's why it came from these mirrors, that the bronze laver, which was what the priests had to use, the water from it, to prepare themselves to offer any offering, was made from this. And this woman moved away from these women who had served in this way. Because these women, they had relations with their husbands, the Mitzrayim, in Egypt, tachat hatapuach. So this is a reference, I believe, to Song of Songs. Literally, we could say it refers to under the apple tree. And it may be referring to the way that they went out into the fields where their husbands were laboring as slaves. Vezo kilkala la'acher tidbakbo. So it says, and this one ruined it, la'acher, because she went and clung and became attached to another one. We'll just finish this verse and then we'll finish for this time. So an earthenware vessel. He hishketa et hanoev. She gave the adulterer to drink yayin meshubach, fine wine. The kosot meshubachim, when in beautiful fine glasses or fine cups. Lefichach, and for this reason, tishte mayim hamarim, she is going to have to drink bitter waters, the mekida, in a cup, bezuya shalcheres, in a and disgusting. Bezuya, bazui means it's people have disgust for it, just made out of clay. And we'll stop right here. for today. Before yeah, please, if there are any comments at this point.
I had there's, I don't remember where it is. It says, God is a jealous God.
Yes, yes, right. It says that when it talks about the 13 attributes, and it is the word Elkanah, right? A jealous God. And the jealousy has to do, again, that when people go and worship other things as God, when they have idolatry, okay, they perform acts of idolatry. It raises this spirit of jealousy. And it's not to, in other words, somehow minimize God, but to describe the horrible feelings that this creates in the world, right? In the spiritual universe, that the lack of faithfulness and this going after other gods and not the ultimate source of the universe raises this kind of awful, awful feeling. Because feeling this way is terrible. I realize I'm probably making a bad comparison, but you know that if you've ever raised a dog, for example, and maybe it occurs with cats as well, I'm not sure, but it is typical of dogs, that dogs adore you. And when you go and show love to someone else or to another dog, they can't stand it. They feel terrible. But I think as human beings, it's also a feeling we have that when somebody when people are partners and one of the partners goes and breaks faith and has a close relationship with someone else, it creates terrible feelings of betrayal, essentially betrayal in the other person. So I think that the Torah is using that word intentionally to describe just this awful sense that one has when you behave that way, when people behave that way.
I have a question.
Sure.
If the man is single and the woman entices him, even though she's married, is he sinned? Does he sin because he doesn't get? I mean, he it's not his fault because she enticed him. But and another thing, if the man doesn't want to do what the woman was, adultery, and he says, I respect your spouse, I respect your husband, I will not do that. That's what happened to Joseph. And when that lady tried to, entice him, does God then give him a mitzvah?
Okay. So you're asking me two very different questions here, right? So let's deal with the first one, which is that he is seduced. So I think while there may be some mitigating circumstances, at a certain point, we cannot claim the devil made me do it. It's not a good excuse. If you go that route, you wind up with a lot of other implications that you're not going to want. So as hard as it is, you have to do what you can do not to be seduced. And even though the seduction gets basically on the person who committed the act of seduction, nevertheless, even the person who's seduced, unless of course God forbid a minor, if you're an adult, you're responsible for your behavior. You are. Okay. As far as the other situation where we're talking about Joseph, well, ultimately Joseph is known as Yosef HaTzadik because he was able to, and he kept his mind alert as to what a terrible thing it would be if he were to commit adultery. So we'll stop there. I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording, and to be continued.